Hey everyone, Casella here. Quick episode note. I realized while editing that throughout this episode, I referred to the main character of the novel by both her given name, Ray, and her nickname, Sunshine. Consider that point disambiguated. Sorry about that. As this episode goes out, I'll be on my way back to Buffalo from ReaderCon, hopefully with some good recordings in tow. In the meantime, enjoy the show. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse, he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Brookins. Each episode, we take a book, usually some kind of speculative fiction book, and we ask a reviewer or scholar, an author or editor, or someone from the book world to talk us through it. Today we are discussing Robin McKinley's 2003 novel Sunshine, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Laura Zats. Laura is one of the founders of Headwater Literary Management. She's been a literary agent since 2014, and she specializes in genre writing, including YA, romance, mystery, and our old pals SF and F. Laura is also one of the hosts of Print Run, an extremely good podcast about the publishing industry. Laura, thank you so much for joining. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing so well.
As we were talking before we started recording, I was just admiring your podcasting setup there. It looks very nice. And we started today at this time because you were doing some gardening. Is that right?
Yes. Trying to catch it before the rain. I'm in Minnesota and we are getting a ton of rain coming in, whereas on the East Coast, you've got the heat wave. So...
Yeah, we're fortunately like slightly buffered here. We're right by the lake, so we get all the snow, but we get all these other benefits to the year. So it's not too hot here, so that's nice. But
good.
Yeah, we have like a bunch of native plants in our front, but it's so dark weirdly on our street that like they're slow. So we've still got some blooms coming up. So
yeah, that's the plan. Is very slowly we're crawling back a bunch of invasives and a bunch of weed cloth and slowly putting in natives. So
yeah, fun invasives. This might tie into the episodes somehow. What do you got creeping in? Yeah. Before we get into this book, anything else you have been reading or working on interesting?
Oh yes. So I'm so late to the party here, and it's kind of shameful because I get submissions to me from writers who like comp this book all the time. I am so proud to announce that I'm finally reading The Black-Tongued Thief by Christopher Buehlman. I've read a lot of his horror before, so I'm like jumping over into his fantasy work, and I'm reading it so slowly. I'm having such a good time with it. I'm so mad that like I put this off. It's been on my like to read pile for a really long time. And I'm finally jumping in, and I will be reading The Daughter War next.
Oh, cool. No, that's good to hear. That's been on my list as well. I've heard conflicting things about it that made me interested. People really in the tank for it and other people less so. So, yeah.
It's really rough. It's really dark. But, like, I find that when I am thrown a high fantasy, if it's something in the world building that is a little bit left of center and like this is taking place a while after this huge war where basically like the goblins messed everything up, and most importantly they killed all the horses. So this is like a quest book in a high fantasy world with no horses. Yeah. And that just like tickles me. Oh, I'm so excited about it. But I also am trash for Between Two Fires. So I was primed. I was ready to fall in love.
Oh, that's cool. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through not non-fantasy, but Peter Rock's Makeshift, which is like it's like kind of a quasi post-apocalypse, post some sort of society breakdown. The viewpoint characters are all like young teenagers.
Sure.
In this really isolated, it's on like this little like island in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. It's beautifully written in this very simple kind of way. It feels thus far kind of in like the maybe like Ocean's 11 crowd. Sorry, Ocean's 11. Geez, not Ocean's 11. Station 11. Very different.
I was going to say, is it a heist?
Yeah.
Do we have a
heist? No well-dressed thieves breaking in. No, but then that kind of like literary post-apocalyptic kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it thus far. It's doing a good job of really building in the natural world in a way that doesn't feel kind of like, I don't know, like forced or like airdropped in. It feels like someone who's really spent like a lot of time just like poking around the beaches, poking around the woods in like Washington. So it's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be good on audio? Most of the books I read for fun are on audio.
I absolutely do, because it's the journal of
Okay.
one of these kids. So it has a pretty strong kind of voicey kind of element. So
I will add it to the list.
so many books. Let's not go ahead in time to an apocalypse. Let's go back in time to some sort of other post-apocalyptic setting. Today we are talking about Robin McKinley's Sunshine. So this was published by Berkley in 2003. It's a fantasy novel. I would say it's a pretty solid example of an urban fantasy. It's got vampires and shapeshifters and magic. Its main character, nicknamed Sunshine, is a baker at a coffee shop who is kidnapped by vampires, escapes with the help of another vampire and her own latent magical powers, gets drawn into a big complicated plot involving ancient grudges and a large government organization that fights supernatural threats, all while getting up early to bake. Sunshine won the Mythopoeic Award in 2004, which is from, if people don't know, the Mythopoeic Society, which I'm realizing as I say that, I've never said that word out loud. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
I looked it up before this podcast. You are saying it correctly.
Oh, great. That is a huge relief. That is a scholarly organization that talks about Tolkien and Lewis and sort of that style of fantasy. McKinley's well known for her other adult fantasy and for children's books, having won the Newberry Award, and I think was nominated for another one as well. I had seen this book on lists. I hadn't heard it talked about much. Laura, why did you want to pick this one? Why is this the book?
This, to me, stands as a very like seminal vampire novel. But I have literally never had a conversation with anybody about it. I sort of feel like this is a book that has been reprinted, republished, I think 3 or 4 times. It's got awards. It's got blurbs up the wazoo. And yet it's sort of, and it's written by Robin McKinley, like the Robin McKinley. And yet it sort of, like, it feels in my brain and kind of in my experience living and now working in science fiction and fantasy that it takes up space, but it isn't revisited and nobody talks to it. And I read it, I think, right when it came out. I'm sure I got it right around when I was 14. So it's been living in my brain forever, and it feels like it should be living in everybody else's brain, but I don't think it has.
Yeah, I think first off, I think you're right. And there is something weird and fascinating about that, particularly because it comes in a period like a little right around the same time as so many other things in the same vein that, like, I mean, people remember of course, a lot of them have had adaptations, but people remember the Southern Vampire Mysteries, which turned into True Blood.
Yeah, which I think the Sookie Stackhouse series started a year or 2 before this one came out.
And there's, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that comes out very similar to this, but this one feels, having read a couple of those, it feels way up there.
Oh, yeah.
I think maybe just the strangest thing is that it's a standalone. And I don't know, if I had read this in a vacuum, well, I would die because there's no air, but if I had read this in a vacuum, I don't know that I would have expected this to be a series. But being familiar with people like, Charlaine Harris, Kim Harrison, these kind of writers, this to me feels very series starting kind of a book.
It does.
It doesn't end on a cliffhanger, but it definitely ends on like more adventures are coming.
And there's a lot of unresolved loose ends.
Yep.
There's like more than you would expect for a standalone. And yet, Robin McKinley never writes sequels. She's never written one. She's like revisited topics before, but like she wrote this fully intending it to be a standalone.
That's fascinating.
I know.
It feels so informed by
what
urban
happens next.
Yeah, urban fantasy is such a genre and has all these tropes that are here, but then it just stops. That's interesting. One thing I'll say just structurally that really struck me about this is not a criticism, but it was so strange that I started counting, was how many named characters are in here.
Yeah.
There are 16 named characters in the first 4 pages of this book.
Our girl Sunshine loves to info dump.
Yeah. And just that has that feeling of like this could so easily grow into a sprawling world because we've listed all these other people that you could follow off a little bit. They could have their own little subplots.
And you find out a good handful of those named characters from those first 4 pages do have secrets that then apply to later in the book. So you're given a little bit of that.
The other thing about this that I was thinking about was so fascinating compared to other similar urban fantasy, you know, kind of like supernatural, romance adjacent stuff, different kinds of vampire literature and film, is even though it has a lot of those tropes of that kind of established genre, and like it hits a lot of those great beats, right? We've got a lot of like, we got sexual tension with the vampire. We've got, you know, reveals about, you know, heritage, secret magical heritage, unexpected help from neighbors and friends who wind up having their own secrets, you know. It's got a lot of those beats, but there are things about the actual info dumping and world building here that feel more in line with a different kind of fantasy and maybe even a different kind of science fiction. And I think it's really interesting how slowly McKinley reveals how different this world is.
Yeah.
Because it really starts with like this is just like, you know, your every girl, you know, every woman protagonist, you know, just a straight talking.
Works at a bakery. Yeah.
Works at the bakery, you know. And it just kind of starts that way, laying out how the town works, how things work. Oh, there are vampires. Okay, got it. There's vampires. Okay, there's shapeshifters. Okay, there's some werewolves and stuff. Okay. And then over the course of the first maybe like 25% of the book, first third of the book, slowly builds up that, oh yeah, also we're living in the aftermath of this huge world-changing war, that even though there are things here we recognize that are clearly from this earth, like they name like books and movies and things like that that are from this earth.
Dracula in particular gets mentioned multiple times.
But that this is actually an alternate world that is really quite different. And like we don't know what nation they're in. We don't know if like the nations of the world look the same. All of the information given to us about like how the internet works feels like it comes from like a parallel timeline.
The internet makes absolutely no sense. Yeah. When we were talking about what book to cover as I was coming on A Meal of Thorns, I think one of the things I described about this book is that it has this incredible amount of world building that doesn't need to be there. It has no business being there. Like there's no reason why the events of this book require that level of backlog and history and difference from regular urban fantasy. There's no reason.
But it's there.
And maybe that's why but it's there. And maybe that's why I keep coming back to it.
It's there. And it's so like McKinley's a good writer and like knows how to make that sort of the interesting thing, right? Like none of the world building is of the like, as you know, Bob, you know, none of it's really like revealed in scene. It's literally just like the main character internally just kind of being like, yeah, and here's how this works.
And as her viewpoint changes, as she discovers her magic, as she gets thrown into the situation, she is having to reassess the way the world works. So it makes sense that it happens that way.
It makes sense, but the depth of the difference is so wild. Because yeah, it could have just you could have just set this somewhere in the late 90s, early aughts, anywhere in America or Canada, and it would have worked.
We would have believed you. It would have functionally been almost the same book. Maybe it wouldn't have haunted me quite as much in the last 20 years.
I think for me, that's one of the things that really stuck with me after I put it down was that, like, well, I do think like the main plot, the character interactions, the beats and the tensions, like those really work and those really pull you through. But what I found myself thinking about a lot was how some of the sort of like allegorical or metaphorical levels that aren't super clear wind up for me like, I don't know, ringing a lot more loudly because of the depth of the alternate world building, specifically in how it is structured as like an us versus them. What are the vampires here and what are the other supernatural creatures? The novel doesn't like set up super clearly that these are like analogies for ethnic differences or different sexualities or anything like that. As cleanly as like a lot of vampire stuff does, right?
Right. It sort of feels to me like how vampires and the others in general are approached here, but most specifically the vampires, is that they are like Robin McKinley is uninterested in engaging with most of that typical vampire human trope and dynamic. Like, we don't find out until 75% of the way through the book that it is illegal in this world to write slash fiction between vampires and humans. Like, you would think that a vampire book like this, where there is sort of like this semi-romantic vampire character, that would have been covered. The attention to the do I want to live forever, etc., is taken off the table immediately when you find out that this main character cannot become a vampire. Like, all of these things that bring the tension and that you're expecting, and again, that like sort of sexuality, queerness trope regarding the feeding and all of that as related, don't feel like they're vampire beats in the same way. Did you feel that?
Yeah, and I think part of it is that even though Khan, becomes clearly, like, there's obviously hit you over the head with it, romantic tension later in the book with it. Despite that, this book never loses sight that it wants vampires to be like weird and kind of gross.
I found, like, and I had a very different viewpoint of Khan and Sunshine when I was 14, when I was reading this. But as an adult reading this, it became very clear that Constantine never stops being a monster. The only time that there is that sort of sensualness and that connection is after they both step outside their roles, Khan as a vampire, Sunshine as a human, and start playing like in the in-between individually, and they form a bond that then they're able to kind of come across that. But he never stops being a monster. And the other vampires, it is never considered that they are anything but monsters.
It feels like it's sticking the premise that vampires are really monsters and there's something weird about being attracted to them in a way that, like, Twilight says that, but then immediately needs you to forget that, right? Or like, Buffy says that, but then like has to forget it like every episode, for a different attractive vampire, not every episode, but
I mean, it should be every episode.
But this like remembers it and like keeps that tension alive. That's one of it. The other thing I think is there's some weird dynamics in here that I haven't thought through totally in terms of the cops, right? In terms of this SOF, which are like, what was it? It's like the
Special Other Forces.
Special Other Forces, which is a terrible acronym. But so on the one hand, like, I think there's some awareness within the character of kind of like how propaganda works, right? And they talk about like, if someone winds up getting shot, like just saying they were a demon is a good catch-all descriptor, right? Like, oh, okay. And there's a healthy skepticism towards this big organization, but they're also kind of like buddying around, chilling out, right? And the whole thread of finding out that the SOF has been like staffed with, what do they call them, part bloods?
Yeah, part bloods.
Like people who are like part demon or part shapeshifter, part some other supernatural being, is a really strange thread. I don't totally know what to make of it. And that these people who are basically hiding part of their identity, who have the idea that if they kill the really bad ones, the vampires, they'll be allowed to like be themselves in public. It's a strange idea.
Yeah, and I think it's an idea that both McKinley and the characters in the book haven't quite balanced with yet, because like contextually, all of the people that are in the SOF have been told, like, I think the part bloods have been, usually they're part demon, because I think everything else kind of gets weeded out or caught. Like if you're aware and you like have to take every full moon off, like you're caught. But they join thinking this is how we can protect and find and support the rest of us, because a lot of those powers don't manifest until later. But then you get in and you're told, we got 100 years before we lose to the vampires. This battle is ongoing. The voodoo wars are not over. And then you are presented with just one boss who is very clearly possessing of some other type of power and has some other aims that are very different from what the local agents have. And like, it is, as a standalone book, it is by far the weakest part of this story. If it was a series, it would be the most interesting and important part of the story, but it's not a series.
The way, again, like one of those things, like the book doesn't need to do this, but it did.
Yeah.
And the way it like sets up the idea of like the government is like the global council, you know? Like,
yeah. What does that mean? Nobody knows.
don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Just all of these odd little touches about how that larger world works. And again, like a lot of times when this kind of urban fantasy, like to take Buffy as like something someone
Right.
people are familiar with, like where like the world of Buffy is our world, and then if you're on the inn, you know that there's also this sort of secret history of all these supernatural things that are going on. This looks like that at first, but then you guys know like the supernatural things here have changed things much more radically than our world, right? And it sort of seeps into everything, and you start wondering about all the aspects. Is like, you know, is Sunshine, our main character, is she like a normal person like we think she is as a baker? Or is she actually like from a much more alien world than ours? And of course, it kind of turns out it's both. And I think that's part of what infuses it. Even like, you know, we have her boyfriend, Mel, who also, as an aside, I thought really interesting as a romantic dynamic. Just that, like, this is a person who has a pretty happy but not terribly serious romantic relationship. I feel like you don't see like pretty happy but not terribly serious that often in this kind of thing. And it was kind of fun. I kind of dug that.
Yeah, I think there's only one moment when she is questioning where she's like, that habit of us just like being cool with each other and letting us, you know, figure out our own thing and not rely on each other emotionally, that ends up becoming a wall. And there's one exact moment where she's like, man, bummer. And then the rest of the time she's like, cool, my boyfriend, and is very chill about it, which is also a level of casualness you do not expect to see in a vampire book.
And that it's not like when she is feeling feelings for Khan, it's not like this big flashing like, oh, but I have a boyfriend. Like doesn't even enter the equation.
Yeah, there's never a question that even though there is one moment of like sexual sort of tension, but even that is written very like animalistically and very like reactionary. Her relationship with Khan is never written in opposition to her romantic relationship with Mel. It's almost like it doesn't apply. It's totally different. It's totally new. Nobody's ever had this type of relationship with a vampire before. She has 2 romantic relationships. What does that mean? Read the book. You figure it out. Yeah.
And not in like the expected vampire novel love triangle. It's just just two different people.
Yeah.
The reason I brought Mel up is that he is one of the people that as it goes on, we learn more about him, and it seems like, we could learn even more from him if there were more books.
Or if Sunshine wanted to ask a single question about anything to anybody. She loves thinking about the way that the world works and doesn't ask a single question.
I know, it's wild. But sort of like believable as a character who's just kind of informed and kind of keeps to herself. When we learn that like Mel has all these magic tattoos, it's hinted at like he has some sort of experience in the war that was very formative. And then basically every character we spend any amount of time with winds up having some kind of secret magic thing. And initially I was like, oh, that's convenient. Oh, that's convenient. And to be fair, like it is convenient, but it also starts feeling like, no, actually just everybody in this world has this bigger history that they're ignoring and hiding from each other.
And also that wall that her mom tried so hard to build for her when her mom divorced her dad isn't actually as much of a wall as she might be hoping.
Another just point about this novel is just it's such a strange little thing, but I just kind of loved it, is how much this builds up the mom is going to be a character.
Yeah.
And the mom is always kind of like one room over from the action, but like basically is never on the page.
No.
It's fascinating.
They don't get along at all. Like all her mom does is leave her little magic charms. That's it. The whole time.
Something I often not complain about, but kind of like point out in fiction, like when, you know, 'cause especially when we're in speculative fiction of any kind, fantasy, science fiction, where we're already kind of worried about realism, right? And then depending on the book, a lot of people throw around accusation of like what's real or not real, what's realistic or not realistic. And something I often kind of bring up is that it's really hard to write a novel that has the extent of human interactions that any normal human has, because it just takes over. You know, most science fiction and fantasy people seem to know about 4 or 5 people, and that's like their whole world.
Yeah.
and not to say this like is 100% realistic in that way, but this book, more than any other I can think of, kind of makes a stab at like, here's all the people I kind of know and interact with. And it's a ton of people because like, if you have a job, if you talk to people at your coffee shop, the number of people you notice ratchets up. And pretty soon, like, 100 people you interact with once a week. This is one of the very few books I've seen try to do that. And I think that in a weird way makes some of the world building and the messiness of this kind of work. Because you just go, I kind of know that person, but not that much. And then, oh, wow, it turns out that actually I do want to talk to my landlady more than I thought.
I find myself really charmed by the fact that in the scenes that take place in the coffee shop or when Sunshine is thinking about her work and the people, like she has this compulsive need to feed people. And that's why she's a baker. And it's also her family bakery. But I find, and this is something that happens so much in fantasy and is used, I think, at least in the early 2000s, was a good hook, I think, to bring like high fantasy readers into urban fantasy was to like have a food thing. So like I'm thinking about like the Dresden Files, there's like the steak sandwich that the bartender makes and that sort of a thing. In the Sookie Stackhouse books, there's the pecan pie and the burgers and all of that. And what I'm fascinated with is in this book, she never describes any of the baked goods. Like she talks about like, I'm making cinnamon rolls, I'm making muffins, I'm doing this thing, but there are baked goods that are named and you never find out what they are. You never find out if they're a cake. You never find out if they're a bar or anything like that. And in place of that, we get these unnamed or almost unnamed characters' reaction to that mystery baked good. And that is what informs Sunshine's view of the world and helps inform it as it changes, which I think is such an interesting choice.
On the one hand, this coffee shop feels like so very specifically like 1999 and like this way.
Oh my God.
So incredibly.
I miss those so bad.
But I will also say that it feels from the perspective of like behind the counter, like someone working there, a lot more realistic than most of your fantasy coffee shops. So I worked in coffee for a long time. The morning schedule here was mildly traumatic for me because I know what it's like to be like, not quite this early because coffee is like a little later than the bakers, but like having to like figure out who works at 5 a.m. week after week and how like vitally important those trades become. That hit me. That hit me hard. But this has like a level of realism around that and about like the actual working there that was a huge plus for me for this book, because when that's not realistic, and I don't want to name names, but there are some very prominent coffee shop books, fantasies, where the obvious lack of familiarity with that realism really hits me.
No one ever gets busy. No one ever burns themselves. No one ever mops a floor. Like,
right, when people call in sick,
you
exactly.
got people sweating and screaming at each other and all sorts of stuff, which does, having also worked in food service, it feels very real.
I will say on the world building level, I do always kind of like steeple my fingers a little bit when there's been a giant world altering war and they're still getting like coffee and chocolate. I'm like, where's that coffee and chocolate coming from? Tell me more about how the Voodoo Wars influenced those trading lines. But that's a pretty
okay. Yeah. In the world building, it says that the cities are smaller, so there are still people everywhere, but they are spread further apart.
Okay, all right.
It's that people are spreading out because there are the bad spots, which I also love. Mm-hmm. You have this element, this bad spot that is influencing the geography and the rebuilding of this post-war world. What the hell is a bad spot? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's something humans feel, but like, what is it?
Something I really like the disjunction between, here are the things I'm going to info dump to you about. Here's how all this works. And then here's this thing that, of course, you know how bad spots work, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone in the world knows how it works so deeply that, of course, she wouldn't explain it to you. Yeah. But in the way it affects like their actual like movement through the terrain, like frequently. Yeah, it's cool.
So one word, and I haven't read this critically, this book ever. Like I've read it many, many, many times, most of when I was a teenager. But the word that kept popping into my head is like slick or like slippery. The writing itself, especially when it comes to like movement or big ideas or action in particular, the prose and the way that the main character embodies and internalizes and like processes big ideas, it's very slippery. There's never a moment where we pause and go, okay, here's the deal. Here's the plan. It's all just like slick.
I know what you mean. I'm nodding along here. There's something about the focus of it and kind of like where the strength of description lies that doesn't lie like where you would expect it to be for plot reasons. There's in the whole back half, there's like multiple sequences where I was taking notes and I'm still totally not following how like the using the internet / magic Nowheresville astral projection thing worked. I'm still not totally clear on that.
Well, she doesn't know how it works either because it's not supposed to be able to be possible.
Right. But they're like pages and pages where I'm like, I'm not totally sure what happened here.
Yeah.
And then the action scenes themselves are just, they're kind of a blur. They feel kind of like an underlit big budget movie, right? Where like lots of stuff is happening, but I'm not totally clear what. But
blurry, not in a craft failure way, but in an intentional way.
The more I was thinking about it, and particularly with like how the book is structured, like section-wise and chapter-wise, it really is that like Ray's focus and what she's interested in is not like the plot that Khan has, right? So like if you told this story from Khan's perspective, or maybe from like one of the SOF perspective or something like that, it would have this very kind of like traditional like arc and revenge and counter revenge kind of thing going on.
Yeah, with SOF, they're saving the world. So I had a thought when I was reading this, because everything that we've talked about up until now, we're talking about it in terms of urban fantasy and in terms of the early 2000s and in terms of other vampire works. I think that this book has done a disservice if you read it without looking at it in terms of fairy stories, specifically fae. Like this, I think it could be argued that even though this is a quote unquote vampire book, that the vampires are really functioning more like a fae character than a vampire character, including the slickness, including that otherness, that monsterness, the different senses, the fact that they move and are motivated by things that are so alien to the human experience. And looking at McKinley's prior books, almost her entire backlist up until this point, up until she just came out of nowhere with an urban fantasy book, is fairy tale retellings. And part of me almost doesn't want to describe this as a vampire book anymore.
No, that tracks. That like 100% tracks. Specifically the things with, first off, just using the other as the catch-all.
Right.
Right. Like that's the real important distinction. It's not vampires and werewolves, it's others. And what the perilous gifts they can offer you. But the specifics of like how they move through the world, the bad spots, when we get the really brief descriptions from Khan of how vampires both see the world and move through the world, like there's that whole thing where like their ability, like he's talking about like powerful vampires, like ability to find people. It's not about how far away things are. It's about how like different things are in between.
Yeah. How homogenous the like things are in between the 2 points.
And then like when he's moving around, and I think what clicked for me is in one of those sections when he's sort of trying to explain, because he has like his weird like lair hangout, right?
Yes. And his part of the lair is very like underground, very like in tune with nature. And then his dead master's lair is like typical vampire.
Right. Overstuffed with kitschy, like, But when Khan is explaining to Ray how he's going to like go back with her and how he's going to move, and it's this very unusual, it doesn't like map to how like humans think about the physical world. That's not like him using a power.
Right.
That's just how vampires move and see all the time.
Right.
And that I think clicks back to that idea of them being like more like the Fae. They like fundamentally inhabit the world in a different way. And it's the same world we're in, but sort of like these different levels of it.
And I also think that the fairy story element is reinforced in Sunshine's powers in and of herself. Like there is like her worries about her heritage and her experience with her magic almost feels totally different from how you see anybody else performing magic in the book. And the fact that after she gets healed from her like poison cut, she has this sort of concept of her power and herself that she returns to, which is sunshine, a doe, a tree, my dear self, my tree self, which also feels very, very fae. Like you wouldn't see this like my magic self is a deer and she's not immune or able to battle like the forces of vampiric darkness because she's a special snowflake. She's able to do it because she's related to nature and sunlight, and that is the antithesis of like what the vampire affinity is. It feels not like a vampire book at all when you think about it in that term.
This has such a strange blend of pretty like off the shelf kind of mechanistic magic. Like here's how the wards work. Here's how we set up this thing, right? Where like a magic user will kind of explain, okay, I'm going to do this tattoo on you and it will help you do this, you know? And then Ray's experience is very much of that thinking about those different selves, right? And like, is my tree self and my deer self over to like able to overpower the dark self that I also have? And this constant sort of like feeling of like balancing like who you are, that's very, very non-mechanistic. And just the way those are like right side by side, like it has these chunks in here that are just like, yeah, like if I read this in a Charlene Harris book, I wouldn't blink at the way some of this magic works.
Right.
But then other things feel like this deeper, stranger kind of thing going on.
The closest you get is like Yolanda's ward magic, which is still very like, it has that sort of go with the flow, very like, you know, natural power kind of element. But with her, it's very clear that comes from such a strong place of research and practice and work that you kind of reach the conclusion. And I think I think she's told multiple times that if she had known that what she was trying to do with her magic wasn't possible, things wouldn't have happened the way, like she wouldn't have tried. Multiple people say that to her. And I think with Yolanda, it sort of feels like like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where like when you're starting a subject, you have tons and tons of confidence, and then the more you learn, it drops down. And then like it feels like Yolanda's at the point where she knows so much that she also knows what she doesn't know. And Sunshine almost refuses to know anything. Like she never even gets to the top of that roller coaster because she did magic like 3 times 15 years ago and immediately stopped, and isn't even hugely revisiting that like basis of like laying those powers out. And it's just vibes.
I was really fascinated by, this is another one of those like weird little quirks of the alternate history that runs like a little deeper than I would anticipate. The warding in general, just like, oh yeah, in general, everybody puts magical protections around their house and different ones for your car and different ones around, just this like, it has this sort of like, there are a bunch of points in this where sort of like background assumptions that people have jump out because of this deep alternate history kind of setup that you wouldn't get if it were just in like, if it were in Sunnyvale, if it were in Detroit, right? Like the fact that everyone feels the need to do this has this level of like paranoia. That's hit me kind of hard. Like, especially because I think of like, I remember 2003 and like, obviously like thinking back like pre 2001, it's even better. Like that just not that level of like constant paranoia in everything. And this is like anticipating this sort of like on the one hand, this is an almost goofily in parts cozy and comforting novel, right? Where like I befriend a weird old lady who might be a were hedgehog or something. And I give her, you know, my special bakery treat and she loves it, you know. It has that, but then it has these other points where like, oh yeah, and everyone surrounds themselves with like the most intense security they can afford as a matter of course.
My whole family disappeared in the Voodoo Wars.
Yeah, right. Those things pop up too. Like, oh, cool. Like, it's fun that like I have found out that like my regular is actually a half demon cop and he's kind of a good guy. You know. Oh, by the way, miscegenation's illegal. You know, it just has like these really like abrupt, like jarring kind of revelations about how this world works in ways that again they're not strange for the narrator. But they are really strange, like when you're sort of hit with them, and the way that McKinley sort of like doles those out to you from this person who, again, like just like super normal, like, oh, I got to do laundry.
She does so much laundry. She does so much laundry in this book. She's covered in blood all the time.
It does a really good job of having like, yeah, this is a believable, relatable, you know, late teenager, early 20s kind of person. And then just keeps like doling out these little, oh, but she's actually in a much stranger world than you think she is.
Yeah, it's a weird little book. It's a weird little book.
I dug it. Let's take a quick break. I want to grab a drink of water. And I want to come back. I want to talk more about where this sort of like anticipates and sits. Yeah, it's strange. Right. I will be right back. I'm just grabbing a drink. All right, we are back. We are still talking about Robin McKinley's Sunshine. My cover is not great. This is the edition I have. I don't think any of the covers are super great. But what was fascinating about this, when I ordered it, I didn't realize till it came in, is it's from Speak, which I didn't know.
Yes.
And that is a Penguin teen.
Yep. So this is the copy that you have, and the copy, I think I have a first edition, but it was published in mass market, and it's falling apart. So I too got the Speak edition, mostly also just because I could take notes in it in a way that I would never do to my falling apart original copy. So whether or not this book is YA is something that I have been thinking a lot about for 15 years, maybe 20 years, because it was published by Berkley as an adult novel. It won an award as an adult novel. In a award that specifically distinguishes that, yeah. Specifically distinguishes it. It was also not Robin McKinley's first adult novel. So she had her fantasy, her new IP fantasy was YA, and a lot of her fantasy retellings were YA, but not all of them were published at a children's publisher. Like Deerskin, for example, was published with an adult science fiction fantasy publisher. So like she had been playing in both sandboxes. Also, it's worth mentioning that in the 90s and 2000s, when she was kind of jumping back and forth, YA was quite a bit squishier as a category than it is today. The original Sunshine was published as an adult book, but I can guarantee you that I picked it up in my very anemic YA section from Barnes & Noble. It was a very large Barnes & Noble, but it was, early 2000s. So it was a very anemic section. So I can guarantee you that Barnes & Noble shelved it in the teen section. It has since been republished by Penguin as a teen book, as a YA book. This Sunshine is 25 years old when this book happens. Not only is she 25, but she's like an old 25 because she didn't go to college. She barely graduated from high school and started working full time right after that. So she lives alone. She's 7 years into her career. Like this is an adult book that I like, as somebody who works in YA and adult science fiction and fantasy, I look at this and said, I would never pitch this as YA. But also I read it when I was 14.
That's tricky. I mean, that's thorny.
Yeah.
Okay. bunch of questions off the cuff. First off, I don't know this offhand. I don't know if you know this offhand, but when was like the official, the manager at Barnes & Noble is printing off YA shelf category things? When's like the explosion?
So I don't know this exactly, and I think it will depend because it's still a little bit true, but it was especially true in the 90s and 2000s that the individual stores had a fairly good amount of flexibility. But I started to read YA in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that shelf kind of started to grow with me. So I feel pretty confident saying that is when it happened. It's specific shelving. Like, these books were still being published. They were still being found. But in terms of like the actual shelf, that I would say that my experiences as a YA reader, as a teen, followed that fairly closely.
Except thinking about like this being, well, like putting a pause on like whether it should be published as YA, just thinking about that decision like to republish it as YA. To me that it feels like it comes out of that sort of like, that weird interstitial phase where we're trying to fill out this thing that we don't know what it is.
And I think it probably got the push over to YA because McKinley was a name in writing for children. Like, we're talking a Newberry Award and a Newberry Honor for 2 books back to back.
Right. Just thinking about that, like, I think about the Wizard of Earthsea, right? Which still, I think, like, the nicest editions you can get of that are probably YA, right? Unless, I don't know, they might have reprinted those again. But
I mean, I feel like they're always reprinting the Earthsea books.
Yeah. That's a bad example for that reason, maybe. But, where, like, there was this need to kind of, like, fill up this new category. And so we're going to, like, repackage older things. So I can kind of see it in that sense. I don't know how to think about this, like, as YA or not.
Yeah, I feel like thinking about it in terms of 2026 YA, the answer is that it's not. And I think it's important to note that the edition that you and I have, the republished edition that is repackaged as YA, was reprinted in 2010. So we are still 15 years out from when a marketer took a look at this and said, yeah, I could resell that. But in that early 2000s, I think it's important to mention that the tastemakers we had on the acquiring level and the types of stories that were allowed to be printed and marketed to children was very different. Like, I think a lot specifically about Sharyn November, who is the editorial director of Firebird, and which was also a Penguin imprint, I believe. And it is now defunct, but like, think of most of the big fantasy writer names from the 80s and 90s who wrote for children. They were published by Firebird. We've got just the huge names I'm thinking about. Like, I wish I was in the room with my bookshelf specifically of Firebird books, but like, we've got the Charles de Lint, and we've got the Robin McKinleys, and just the huge names where there was a real sense of imprint identity that kind of, again, let you push kind of the same way that McKinley's Newberry let you kind of push like backwards as well as forwards into the age ranges. I don't know. I was trying to rack my brain. I was like, did I read Sunshine before and after I read Anne Rice? And I can't say. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Somewhere
out there, does some collector have the Anne Rice YA, edition?
Oh my God. Could you imagine?
That's the thing. I can't.
But I think that there's something to be said about, there are specific types of books. Like, vampire books are their own thing. And the thing about vampire books is that when vampire books are in, they are in. And a reader isn't just going to read one of them. They are going to read all of them, which is why I can guarantee you probably the same year I read Sunshine and I read Anne Rice, and who knows what else I read at that point. Maybe a Anita Blake. I don't know. Like, who's to say?
Early aughts. I mean, that's big vampire time.
Prime, and it was right before the crash because it was right before Twilight, and Twilight sanitized, softened. I think probably what I consider to be the sexier parts of the vampire lore, the queerness, the taboo-ness, the dark. All of these things that like McKinley either engages with or completely ignores in favor of doing like fae stuff. But Twilight happened. Twilight took off, completely took over the market. And then we have not had vampires since. Like it is 2026. Twilight ended. I want to say that the last book came out in 2008, 2009-ish. From there, everything really slowed down. It kind of almost even killed like paranormal romance. And at that point, we're also being fatigued on urban fantasy in general. Fun fact, urban fantasy is being published right now, but it's being called contemporary fantasy.
Oh, okay. So like is that like when you put on like the contemporary adult like music channel, right? Like...
It's got significantly less like steak sandwiches and like wise cracking main characters solving mysteries, but like it still happens. It's just marketed as something completely different. But yeah, after I would say Twilight hit, it was all Twilight for 5, 6, 7 years, and then it stopped. And I think I started agenting in 2014, right as vampires stopped selling. I wanted a vampire book so bad. I didn't sell a vampire book until 2024. Maybe it was 2023. But it took a whole 10 years for vampires to come back. So we are now at the beginning of the upswing.
Okay.
So I am wondering if we are at the very start of like a renaissance of people reading vampire books where they are interested in weird takes like Sunshine. Because now we have romantasy, whereas before, well, it has a name now. We always had romantasy, but it has a name now. It has an awareness now. We've got romantasy, we've got cozy fantasy, we've got cozy horror. I wonder if what kind of weird Sunshine-esque vampire books we're going to be seeing coming up.
That's interesting. That's really fascinating. And it's funny how like the vampire, like I mean we have had a couple, like I'm thinking of like Stephen Graham Jones has done some good vampire stuff.
Yes.
There have been like there's probably more that aren't springing to my mind right now, but there have been some good horror vampires in the last couple of years.
The last couple of years is really when it started. Kind of even before that, it's going to be fairly hard to find. I think the first one that like hit as a big awareness and bestseller was the Grady Hendrix, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying It's a very long title.
Sorry for stepping all over you. Yes. Yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't remember what the full title is, but I think that one. And again, he got to do that because it was weird and twisty and it wasn't quite what you were expecting out of a vampire book. And he was coming off of very playful with tropes horror books, Horror Store, etc. So I think that was the first one. And now we're on the upswing.
I'm going to have to go through and like look through the list now and think about where vampire is. Well, it's funny how like the connection of like the vampire with a romantic thing, obviously not new, but the way it's sort of like whether the vampire is primarily horror or primarily a potentially romance thing, those kind of like keep kind of like branching apart and then coming back together or not.
Yeah. Like how sexy is the vampire, I think is always the question, because it's always a question of how moralistic are we taking this, right? Like how much are we balancing our sexual desires with the violence of the vampire world? And that I think is right now, I think we're firmly in and I'm sorry, I did not ask you in advance if I could swear, but like, are the vampires fuckable? And I think the answer right now is yes.
Right.
Like in 2026, it's very sensual. We've had some Carmela retellings. We've got this like very gothic sensibility that is happening.
Almost Almost like we're all in this huge decrepit house and we're being haunted by the sins of the past or something.
Almost. And I think that the longer vampires are around in the trend, right? Like, and these are roughly 10, 15-year cycles. I think the longer they're around, the more people get to play with how fuckable vampires are. And again, like, even though Sunshine is described as, like, I think on the back, one of the weekly newspapers of Ohio said that this is a dark, sensual vampire fairy tale. And I think that is the perfect blurb, because it's not sexy. It is sensual. Because again, like, Khan is a monster the whole time, but it is more than anything a vampire fairy tale.
Oh, man. I'm not going to look up right now if this week's newspaper is still going. I would bet any amount of money it's probably not. But, oh, man. They got the blurb here recorded. Yeah.
Shout out to whoever was reviewing books in 2003 for the weekly newspapers of Ohio.
Good job. I don't know. That the fuckability question, the romance question, it is weird. And thinking about how a book or a series like Twilight can kind of like gather up sort of that energy and sort of like define it in a weird way for a while. Mm-hmm. That's strange, because you see, like, one of the things I think is interesting about vampire literature is similar to, but probably more so than like zombie or werewolf stuff, is how much you have to decide whether or not you're reacting to what's come before, right?
Yes.
Like,
how much text, of it in conversation are you?
Yeah. And like, I have seen so much stuff that, consciously references to reject, like the Twilight model, right? But even in this, right, there's this, like, how much do we relate how we conceive of vampires to, like, this class I took on vampire literature in high school, right? Like, and having to sort of put yourself next to that. But as there's like more and more of it, I don't know, do we get to like some sort of like a steady state of vampire stuff where we kind of know what they are? I don't know.
It must have been 5 or 6 years ago now. A guy, I want to say that this was a pandemic project, or at least I read it as a pandemic project, but he started a newsletter where, because Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, is in, it's epistolary and it's all dated. And so, do you remember this? I cannot remember what it's called, where this guy reordered Dracula and released each part of the book on the date that it is referring to. So you read it in real time. And I had read Dracula in college. I had seen all of the different movies, every single one. Then I read it in that order. And in that real time, it really becomes clear how much that work as a text has so strongly influenced every American vampire book that has followed it. But what's so different to me is that it is both the source for all of the vampires are monster books and the source for all the vampires are fuckable books, because so much of it is like, if you really emphasize certain parts of it and you really spend time with certain parts of it, it becomes this like yearning obsession and this sort of like past life thing. And then you read some of it and Dracula has hair on the palms of his hands and looks like a monster. And there's also a cowboy and like a literal cowboy. And so I was like kicking my heels in pleasure that rereading Sunshine in advance of this episode, that Sunshine references Dracula, and she's very specifically a reader of vampire fiction. There's one work in it that she reads that's like 40 volumes long or something. And there's specific vampire fiction that she returns to as a comfort time and time again. Most notably, none of those are fuckable vampires in her world. The Dracula that's referenced in it still exists, presumably in its exact form, even though this is so different of a world. And so now I'm sitting there parsing how difficult it is to be, have my feet knocked out from under me each time that this new complexity of this alternate world gets presented to me. But then we're talking about Dracula too. So everything that I read about Khan in the first half of the book is presented very close to a Dracula mention. And so I am contextualizing him with my knowledge of Dracula, whether it is actual textual knowledge or it's cultural miasma awareness, Keanu Reeves in an adaptation Dracula. And it just confuses everything further in a way that I find very rewarding.
The way this is written world building wise reminds me a lot more of science fiction than of fantasy.
Right.
The way that it works. And also she makes a couple like triffids are real in this world, which is like just, oh, by the way, this science fiction thing is real.
Yeah.
The way that she sets up like the slang and the new terminology, not all of them work great for me. I don't know if faux as a shorthand for information works super great for me.
You have to remember that she probably wrote this in 1999.
Yes, 100%. Picturing like, old word processor with a green screen. But like the way she approaches setting up the alternate world feels a lot like science fiction to me. And I think part of the reason this is going to stick in my brain is because of this sort of like temporal space it holds, where this feels so of a certain era, but in a way that is like so clearly anticipating a lot going on, both in speculative publishing, just any like in general concerns right now culturally. Like this feels very current on one level and very like remarkably early aughts on other levels.
Yeah, it almost feels like this is like I'm being messed with. Like this is a master at work who on the surface looks like she is engaging with these very specific temporal tropes and these expectations, but it's disguising something that is not at all that. Like I feel like I've been tricked.
No, I know what you mean. And I think that comes back to like its slipperiness in genre. Is it YA or not?
Yeah.
There's I don't know, there's a level to the craft and how she writes where like when she's info dumping, she's info dumping. And like, not all the terms work for me, but she also has a sort of like, I don't know how to say this, a sort of like mastery over basic structure and voice level stuff that for one just pulls you through and like you don't stumble over stuff, but also I think allows her to be sneakier than you realize.
Yeah.
Because it has such a straightforward voice and it's just Ray taking off my apron, complaining about vampires and stuff in this very like straightforward, YA protagonist kind of way. But then when you step back and think about all of these other things, it really kind of like, I don't know, nags at me.
Yeah. Is this the best vampire book of the late 90s, early 2000s, or is this the worst one? Like, hard in terms of like canon, like it's hard to say. I've always sort of held it in my brain as both an example of like this is the best that has ever done it, but also it's apart, it's separate, and I think it's going to continue to be separate in my brain.
It's weird to have something that feels like a standalone of something that's so established,
right?
Like I feel like you could put this on the shelf next to other things and it would totally make sense. But then you'd be like, but why is there only one of those?
Right.
And then you read it and there is something about it that's just a little different, a little off. I don't know, maybe, we could talk about this book all day. Something about, just to come back, my last thought on this, I think the fairy thing sort of unlocks this for me. Something about the way it thinks about it as its own complete world that's a bigger world that's not all going to fit in here.
Yeah. It has fairy tale logic. Like you get dropped the information that is needed, never mind that it messes up with your assumption of the way that the world works.
Oh, good stuff. Thank you. I've said this on like every episode, but just part of the reason I did this because I want bookish people to put books in front of me that I might not otherwise get to. And this was a fun one.
I'm just excited that for the first time since 2003, I've been able to talk with a human being about this book.
Nice.
It's been like in a little cave in my brain forever. And what a treat to actually get to reread it and talk about it.
This is the other thing that like, I don't want to get like all sappy about books, but like a thing that always fascinates me is that like books do tend to find their readers. They don't necessarily find like their publicity. And it's always fascinating to me that like for almost any given book, somewhere out there are like at least dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of people who like it really sticks in their brain. even if there wasn't like a cultural sort of like gathering around it that connected them. And so, yeah, the excuses to come back to work like that, I always enjoy.
I'm really curious if after publishing this episode, a bunch of listeners will go, oh, I loved that book, and then realize that they also had a very solitary experience with this as a project. It's thorny. It's a thorny book.
It's also funny, like, just thinking about that, whether or not something is YA, I think there's something about reading books when you're younger, and maybe more so historically, maybe it's less so today with the internet being more established, but that you did just encounter stuff more on your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just harder to have larger conversations about it.
Yeah, I will say that, like, maybe it's just because I'm working in both YA and adult right now, but it does seem to me that the lines are becoming very, very rigid to the point where, and this is maybe a totally separate episode, so I apologize, but new adult, which has been mostly present in, you see it a lot, I think it mostly has started to come out of paranormal romance, which is kind of like college-y age, like beginning of the adult life, but still read a lot by teenagers, there's been an argument amongst book professionals for years about, like, is it a real thing or not? Mm-hmm. And the answer, of course, is like books get written with this demographic as main characters and the subject matter all the time. They get published all the time. First publishers were unwilling to acknowledge it, but booksellers were. And then publishers made YA imprint or NA imprints, new adult imprints. But they didn't like make enough money. So then they stopped again. But then like romantasy and stuff happened, and booksellers are still like, hey guys, like this is a thing. And now we have, very much growing out of the popularity of romantasy and like paranormal coming back and all of these things, and the cozies and whatnot, you have big five publishers putting out new adult imprints. In the last year. Maybe the line isn't as stark as it's been the last few years, because in 2026 we're trying it again. The extent to which just like a bisect category affects like people finding a book or not is that's the scourge of my life.
Definitely another episode. Laura, thanks so much for joining. Before we go, where can people find you? Anything you want to share that you're working on or want people to look up?
You can, if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about publishing related things that are thorny, you can listen to Print Run, which is anywhere that you get podcasts. And other than that, if you are a writer and you are listening, I am open to queries.
Very nice. I totally forgot. I always hesitate to like razz people I've never met. But from listening to Print Run for a long time, I had in my head that, Print Run is two people, one of whom is really into fantasy, one of whom is famously not into fantasy.
Well, the thing is he totally is, but he doesn't know that he is.
Well, and then, just like this month, I happened to see a certain byline about a role-playing fantasy game in a fairly niche fantasy magazine.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. I know that guy.
Yeah, my podcast host, Eric Hain, is a very, very large Magic the Gathering player. He also is collecting, very slowly, the mint original Japanese holographic edition of the Pokemon cards. And is writing a horror novel that he doesn't think is a horror novel, but it absolutely is. So he's on our side. He's just not sure.
These are all lit fic behaviors.
These are so lit fic behaviors. Yeah. But we are big SFFH people over here. Just one of us is a little bit more willing to claim the title.
Awesome. Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining. Folks, check out Print Run. It's really, really good. And yeah, hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabriel Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, congrats! You may be good. A few different ways you can do that. You can join our Patreon. Throw us a couple bucks a month to keep the podcast and the magazine sustainable. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a few other perks on the way. If you're interested in a book we mentioned on the podcast, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut. It helps immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, elaborate compliments? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can also follow us on Blue Sky for however long that stays cool, and probably slightly past that. Next time, I record this from a weird Schrodinger's cat position, but assuming all goes well, I'll have an episode about ReaderCon and some fun points around Boston coming up. After that, Anya Loren Wilson is joining to talk about Ray Bradbury's Killer Come Back to Me. More good stuff on the way. Check the website if you want to read ahead. As always, thanks for listening and stay critical out there.